Press the bell icon on the YouTube app to ensure you never miss a new video from Newslaundry.
Welcome to NL Interviews, and we have with us Rana Safvi, whose latest book, the Dastan-e-Ghadar, it came out last month.
It came out in May itself.
So this came out this month. This is also the only English translation of this book,
Yes.
which you just informed me, which I was unaware of. So far, it's only been in Urdu, and is a primary first-person account of the 1857 War of Independence, right? Which is a question we were discussing. You said it wasn't the first War of Independence.
See, when we say that it was the first war of Indian independence, it was not pan-India. First of all, because it was only restricted to the UP, that is Awadh,
Right.
Delhi, Madhya Pradesh and Bihar. So what we call the cow belt or the doab or whatever it is, that's where it was concentrated. And most of the people who joined in the rulers were either affected by the British doctrine of lapse or some other thing which was usurping their own rights. Because all of Punjab was with the British. In fact, it was the Maharaja of Patiala and who sent his army with the British to fight the
Right, that was the
rebels
reinforcements coming in.
And the Afghans, the Gurkhas, they were all siding with the British. So, and the south was unaffected by most of it.
Right.
So, it's, like, I feel it's an uprising, it's a popular uprising, but it's not
To call
really
it the first war
it's not really
would be
a
a
pan-India
misnomer.
war of independence.
So that's another thing, because at least when in school, when I learned it, I was like, here's a list of reasons. I mean, the most obvious one being the paper cartridges for like the thing. That seems to be the main focus as well in this particular account. But all of the other things that we were given as well, like they don't seem addressed at all.
Zahir Dehlvi was 22 years old. He was a poet. He was living in a Delhi which was already under the control of the British. So for him, the rulers were British, and Bahadur Shah was his Badshah and a nominal king. So they were all very content and satisfied with the way they were living, I think. Because at no point of time does he criticize anything to do with the British.
Right. In fact, he calls it the revolt
He
throughout.
calls it throughout. He says they are baghi, ungrateful hai, ye hai, wo hai. He keeps, like criticizing them, and he criticizes their conduct. Of course, that was worthy of criticism, because most of the time they were either, I think, drunk on pa. They got it too soon.
Well, that's never changing.
And the whole of India was not united. So the biggest lesson from this, as one of the British officers said, was that this is the first time that they realized that Hindus, Muslims, upper caste and lower caste can all unite to fight against the British. So in that sense, yes, it was a
So it's like the first, at least, I mean, caste-based united revolt. Like
caste and religion.
Caste and religion. Right, but even then, I'm sure like there were like groups that weren't as involved just by virtue of not living in this cow belt area. Right?
As I said, the entire Punjab, Afghanistan, that area, the south, they were not involved. The northeast, in any case, don't think it was part of the Mughal Empire also, because they had put Bahadur Shah on the throne as Badshah of Hindustan. The cavalry men who came, the sepoys who came from Meerut, they installed Bahadur Shah as their Badshah. That was their first act. That was their first act. And then after that, the soldiers of other regiments belonging to the East India Company, some belonging to the Indian rulers also, revolted against the officers and came and joined the soldiers already inside the fort in Delhi. And in other places also, we have in Lucknow, we have in Kanpur, we have in Jhansi, and the other places where slowly the uprising spread.
Okay. Oh, I should have asked this in the beginning, but let's address this. So how did you decide to translate this? Like, what was the process? Because it hasn't been translated in all this time, which is very strange. And so William Dalrymple has used it in The Last Mughal?
The Last Mughal.
But even he's going by only like the first couplets.
The first. He, I think, got the first because he wanted to use that part regarding Bahadur Shah. So he got those translated and used those. But the rest of the book is also just as fascinating when Zahir Dehlvi he's forced to leave Shahjahanabad and he's on the run for his life. Those parts when he goes to Rampur, then Alwar, Jaipur, Tonk, Hyderabad, those are very fascinating. It's almost like a travelogue and a beautiful description of life of those in those days under those rulers.
In the wake of this particular revolt.
Right. And it showcases a very beautiful syncretic way of life. where everybody is living very happily, the Hindus and the Muslims, they're all living together very happily in Shah Jahanabad, even in Alwar and Jaipur where he goes later on. And I've always been very fascinated by 1857 and the way of life, the way it disturbed the way of life that had been going on. An entire population was wiped out, and forced to leave the city, and how the demographics of Shah Jahanabad changed after that. Because if you go to the Mutiny Memorial on the Ridge in Delhi, there is a plaque over there which says on 20th of September, the city was cleared of the enemy. That's the British putting it up.
I was going to say, who's that a reference to?
And then there's a plaque there by the Indian government, put up much later, I think in the 1977, where they say that the enemy that they are referring to were patriots. So, like that fascinated me, and every time I tried to look it up on the net or anywhere else, you always go back to this book called Dastan-e-Ghadar, and then you realize there is no English translation, only a few excerpts have been used by people like Dalrymple, and many other actually authors who've written on Bahadur Shah have used Dalrymple as their source for, have used Zahir Dehlvi as their source for the character of Bahadur Shah Zafar.
So the book is known, but somehow no one has thought it is significant enough to translate. I mean, that must mean it's only in English and Urdu, right? Like
yes, only in English and Urdu. I am getting a lot of requests for a Hindi translation.
Yeah, I'm surprised that itself isn't there.
People are saying that please, because this will only be at just a change of script and an explanation of a few Urdu words, because there are many Urdu terms in this which I had a tough time, like trying to find out, because they are honorary titles. Some of it is that there were typesetting mistakes, because I couldn't find the original. I found it much later, just before this book went into print. I found out where the original was.
Oh wow!
So I went to Professor Shamsur Rahman Faruqi, because there were a couple of words which I just could not figure out what they meant. So he had come to Delhi, and I went
can you
to
give me
him.
an example?
There's a word in this where it says ke Safar Meena Paltan aa gayi. अब ये सफ़र मीना, I kept hunting for it, पूरे atlases देखे, सब देखे कि ये where is this place called, either there should be a city called Safar or a city called Meena, and I kept asking everybody. Nobody could figure out, and they said there is no city called Safar and Meena in the 19th century. Then eventually when I went to Faruqi Saab, I asked him, I said, ये Safar Meena क्या है? So he laughed and he said, sappers and miners.
Oh. So just to take us off track again, so this particular first-person account, how does this differ from every other book written on the mutiny? I mean, you have someone embedded, but clearly with loyalties that are not towards the mutineers. So, the sepoys themselves. So, like, how is this, in what other ways is this radically different from everything else that we've read or have grown up reading?
The accounts we have grown up reading are written by British themselves.
Okay.
I don't think we have read any account by an Indian who was an eyewitness to it. At least now some are getting translated and available, but when we were in school, there were none.
Right, no, in school, it actually called it the Revolt of 1857, which is how I learned that, last generation.
That's because we read the British accounts. Now, while reading this, I discovered a few more. There was one account in Marathi called, I think, Majha Pravas, I'm forgetting the name, but Mrinal Pandey has translated it for HarperCollins as 1857 A Revolt.
So is that out? I don't
think
so.
Yes, that came out a few years ago. And that describes the uprising in Jhansi and those areas in Madhya Pradesh. Right. And this book describes it in Delhi.
Right,
then you have specifically in Delhi. Then you have a lot of accounts, British lady accounts, the accounts written by the British women in Lucknow and Kanpur. There are a lot of stories by British women from when they were in the residency for a couple of months. So many of them wrote diaries and books, and which came out. Then British officers wrote many diaries that have also been published. And recently, of course, it was published back then in the 19th century, but it's just surfaced again, were two accounts by one spy, a British spy who was embedded in the Mughal court. Yes, he was actually the chief scribe for the commissioner, British commissioner. And his daily job was to go to the court, find out what was happening and send a report. And he continued doing this during the period of the siege of Delhi, the 4 months. So every day, he's called Munshi Jeevan Lal, and every day there is an account of his in his diary, which was translated by the commissioner Theophilus Metcalfe later on. And another account by a Kotwal called Moinuddin, who was again loyal to the British. He also wrote an account which was translated by Theophilus Metcalfe.
Okay, so I mean that's the standard that we've grown up reading.
But those are not very well known.
Oh, okay, right.
So I found them by chance when I was researching that how do I corroborate what Zahir is saying.
Right, so that was actually my next question. How do you fact check a lot? Because this is a first person account, there's a lot of, oh, I saw this. There's a lack of details, there's no dates in here most of the time.
So I must have read at least 7 to 10 books on the period. Some on Bahadur Shah, some, as I said, these 2 accounts by Moinuddin and Jeevan Lal, then another account by this, I'm forgetting the name of that Marathi. He was a Marathi priest who had come to do some yagna in Bithor, and then in between
just stayed on and
in between the uprising happened. And there has been a lot written on Bahadur Shah, on the trial. All these I read to cross check, so that then I would like keep marking and then keep seeing that, like he just says पहली लड़ाई, दूसरी लड़ाई, तीसरी लड़ाई. So अब ये पहली लड़ाई कब हुई? So I had to go back in time and check that when was it, and he is saying that when he is describing that particular place, he is not giving it a modern name.
Of course.
So to find the reference, and that was the tough part of it.
Right, well, hence the live meant walking that thing.
Yes.
So the other question I had then, which also goes back to this, is so he's describing this fairly, according to him, things were harmonious. In fact, the revolt only complicated things, made things worse. Right?
Yes, because as far as he's concerned, the monarchy finished.
Right.
The Mughals, and he talks of that very often. He says कि इनका खिलाफत खत्म हो गई, सल्तनत तख्ता पलट गया. So he keeps talking of that.
I was really surprised also because of the trial. I mean, for like he's never been called to trial, even though he's written this first-person account.
He wrote this much later.
Oh, that's right.
He wrote this in 1900 and I think 11 or something. It got published in 1914, and he doesn't mention the trial at all.
Right. So I was surprised that that's a thing that he was just uninterested in.
He must have been aware of. But probably because the British did a lot of witch hunting, especially of the Muslim population of Shahjahanabad. Now,
why is that? Why especially
this was something that was explained to me by a friend. His name is Mani Mukda Sharma. He is expert on the military aspects of the 19th and 20th century.
Oh, okay.
So I asked him, I said, what was this? Explain this to me. So he said the reason was that the Savars, that is the cavalrymen, they were the first to revolt against the Cartridges because they were the ones who were imprisoned in Meerut, and they came. The Savars mostly belonged to the Muslim sect. So, and the Pathans and from the upper Muslim sects. And the infantry which came much later and joined, they also joined, and by the time the first battle takes place of the uprising, the infantry is also come. Infantry comprised of the upper caste Hindus.
Okay.
So, because the first ones to come in were the Muslims, so in the mind and they came and installed Bahadur Shah Zafar. So, in the mind of the British, it was always what they call the Mohammedans. It was always the Mohammedans who revolted against them.
Oh, so it started that. Oh, that's interesting.
So that was in their mind, it was synonymous, and that is why after they captured Delhi on the 14th of September and 19th of September, it's totally under their control. The first people to move out and to be chased out of Delhi were all the Muslim noblemen and the Nawabs and the Rajas and all that.
Okay, so that's how that exodus takes place. Oh, that is interesting, especially because like in our current culture, climate especially, that's not a thing that you would think, your first wave of revolutionaries. But yeah. And so, again, like to make another segue, so how is it that when you're translating this, when you're working on this, like your own personal feelings on the matter, because to think of then again the English as a good system, a working system, how does that clash? Right. I mean,
when I was translating, I was very, very faithful to
I was thinking of, what's her name, Audrey Truschke's book,
yes.
And the backlash that had, because you're trying to humanize Aurangzeb, and the backlash was immense. And, just to even consider then, like, if you're saying that, look, this Mughal emperor, like, how dare you humanize him, then Angrez ke saath, it has to be so much worse.
I do get a lot of comments sometimes, but you see, Bahadur Shah was not a very controversial figure.
Okay.
And the book very clearly describes when they're talking of, in fact, when he's talking of Ramzan and the day the the so-called rebels came to Delhi, he's describing a scene of the Jamuna Nahan, that subah subah sab aate hain nahane ke liye, all the girls, and he's talking, like fairy-like girls, and then their beautiful sarees, and they're having a dip in the Yamuna, and then they come for the Jharoka darshan of the king, and it's only after the Jharoka darshan that the entire process is complete, and then they go back and have their food. So he's describing that. He's describing at the same time when he's saying, I'll just read out that portion. There is one please. Very beautiful verse where he's saying कि मस्जिदों में अजान की आवाज़ आ रही है और मंदिरों से हरी हरी की आवाज़. So he's describing that, like he was.
Whereas right now, that's how you get into a Twitter fight, by describing the same thing.
So like the things that he says are such a beautiful description of the society in those days.
Well, we can dedicate this passage to Sunu Nigam if we can find it.
He says, सुबह हुई गजर बजा मुर्गे सहर का गुल हुआ. मुर्गे सहर सुबह की चिड़ियाँ, the morning birds, they are now chirping. मुर्गे सहर का गुल हुआ. करने लगे चमन चमन मुर्गे चमन नवागिरी. The birds are chirping all over and like making a noise in all the gardens. मस्जिद और खानका से शोर उठा सलात का. From the dargahs and the mosques, you can hear the azan and the sound of prayers. There में जाके ब्राह्मण करने लगे हरी हरी. And from the temples, you can hear the sounds of Hari Hari being recited by the Brahmins. Right, now, so this is the society in 1857.
Fairly
and
idyllic.
It seems fairly harmonious. There seems to be no conflict at all.
And so after that, though, what happens then when everyone resettles into the city in the wake of the revolt? Because then what happens to this harmony?
See, now in this, for me, the most exciting part of it was when he's chased out of Delhi and how he's trying to escape
the countryside.
The countryside, and like his family is separated, and he describes. In fact, it's a very popular part of Shahjahanabad even today, Old Delhi, Kucha Chelan. And in that area, the British just lined up people and shot them and threw them into wells. And the entire mohalla, all the males in that mohalla were killed, rounded up and killed. And they had prize agents who were just looting, and like the British prize agents, then they would divide it amongst themselves, the bounty. And he's on the run, and all that jewelry that his wife had to be left behind, because the grandmother of his wife says that तुम्हारी जान को पड़ जाएंगे सारे लुटेरे अगर तुम ये लेके चले गए. So she has to leave it all behind. And then it's only after I think 1864 that he comes back to Delhi. Then he sent a letter that if you haven't participated in the uprising, you can come back. But those who had are still not allowed. And general amnesty was given only by I think after 1870s, when there was a darbar held in Delhi.
Oh wow!
The viceroy came and darbar is held, and that time the Muslims are allowed to come back to. And it's very specific. Those orders were given. The Muslims can now come back to Shahjahanabad. And when they come back, they no longer have those positions of power. They've lost all their jewelry, all their belongings, all their. So Bahadur Shah, especially the princes and the royalty, the princesses. There is a book by Khwaja Hassan Nizami. He is an ancestor of the Sajjada Nasheens of Dargah Hazrat Nizamuddin Auliya. So he has given an eyewitness account in a book called Begmat Ke Aansu. He has gone and talked to the survivor of Bahadur Shah's family. He describes how many of them were killed, some of them escaped. Those who escaped, how they were looted, and kahan gaye, koi Hyderabad gaya, koi kahin gaya. Some went to Mecca, some went to like Baghdad to escape the wrath of the British, because the British were after them to catch and kill each of them. So, and then when they come back, they have almost nothing. The Mughal princes and princesses are begging on the streets. They are working as
and the monarchy has been dismantled.
He has gone to Rangoon. He went to Rangoon in 58. And so the life is now totally changed. The people in power are the British. They are the new Hukmaran, and the traders and the trading class especially, that sided with the British and kept supplying them with groceries and things on the ridge. They are the new elite now.
So there's a new social order almost
new social
overnight.
Order. Absolutely, totally new social order. And so
and
Delhi,
how much of that are we still seeing the effect of Abhi?
See, Delhi was destroyed and repopulated twice, 1857 and 1947. So what we see of Delhi now, especially Shahjahanabad, is not what Shahjahanabad was in 1857, because it was destroyed twice. population shifted twice.
Right, so these references are not just removed, they're removed twice over. So for you to repiece all of that must have been incredible. No, because then we're also talking, like, that's the other thing in the news frequently, right, is a lot of renaming of old roads, like Rungazab and whatnot, even though they've been embedded in the tapestry of the country for so long. Like, why is that we are seeing things like this occurring, Habibi? Are we still seeing them as two separate entities? Like, first they were the Mughals, then they were the English.
We are very, I don't think it's a very wise thing that we are doing, but we are judging people who ruled in the medieval ages according to modern standards. In those days, what they did has to be judged by anyone who did something in the ancient period or in the medieval period, has to be judged by the rules that were prevailing in those days.
The parameters of that time.
But we are not.
Much like the Gaurakshak anecdote that you were telling me earlier.
Yes, in this there is, in fact that's my favorite story in this, is of how Bahadur Shah deals with two complaints that come to him. In the morning, as I said, I mentioned Jharoka Darshan. Jharoka Darshan was in one of the balconies, it's called Musammam Burj, in the Lal Qila. He used to sit there early in the morning after his morning prayers, and people had direct this thing to him. They could come and give whatever complaints they had, they could talk to him directly and he would redress them there and then itself. So one morning when he got up, he saw that the butchers of Shahjahanabad were all gathered under the Qila, and at that time the river Yamuna ran just where now MG Road is. So between the Yamuna and the Qila there was a part called Reti, which is the sandy portion of the river. So they were all camped on that. So he asked them, he said, okay, what's happened, why are you here? And they said that the British have told us that, you know, like we make too much of nuisance in the city, like too much of dirt and whatever. We are talking of it today, isn't it? Pollution, etc., etc. So the British have told us to go out of the city. So when
the original odd even.
So when Bahadur Shah hears that, he calls his wazir and he says, take my tent there also. So his tent is also pitched next along with the butchers. So when the Kiledar, who was a British commandant, when he hears that, he comes running and he says, Huzur, what are you doing? He says, I have to stay with my people. If you're throwing my people out of the city, please throw me also. And he says, once I am dead, you can do whatever you want, but as long as I am alive, my people will not suffer. And so they are reinstated. A few months later, the Ghosis, that were the Hindu people, dairy owners, the ones who sold milk, etc., they suffer the same fate. The British tell them that they have to leave the city because they are dirtying and polluting the city.
So section by section they seem to be going through this. It's never just collectively one group, it's always one group is marginalized, picked, and
So when they come there, then the same thing happens. They tell the Basha, sees them sitting there in their tents, and he says, what's happening? He says, we are being thrown out. So he tells his wazir, please take my tent and put it there, pitch it there next to them. So again the commissioner and the Kiledar come running and say, Basha, what are you doing? And he says, I cannot see my people suffer. If they are suffering, they have to be thrown out. You throw me out also. So his sense of justice was for everybody in his and his writ actually only ran inside the Qila, so he could only appeal to the Britishers and do whatever he want personally.
But even within that, there's no identity politics at play, except by the English, right?
Except justice for him. And you know, like when, of course not in this book, but there's another book where this Begmat Kyansu that I mentioned, that when he is leaving the Qila on the 17th of September and he is fleeing to Humayun's tomb, at night he prays, he says, all the Hindus and the Muslims of Shahjahanabad are my children, and don't let them suffer the consequences of my action. Because he felt that the British are against him since he is the leader of the uprising.
So he took the onus on himself. So these are again people who very then embedded into the culture, right?
Yes.
And yet, you know, this kind of renaming of things are kind of...
because we are not reading history, we are reading WhatsApp. People, you know, with Twitter and Facebook have, you know, like made our attention span so less that we can't read more than 200, 300 words. So a WhatsApp serves, you know, like a beautiful history lesson.
Except the history being served is not necessarily factual or remotely accurate.
It's absolutely distorted. I don't think any WhatsApp forward, except the jokes, are to be taken seriously.
All right, that should be the new moratorium. Jokes only on WhatsApp.
Yes. only take jokes seriously. The lessons that the lesson that the British learned was that the Hindu, Muslim and the upper and lower caste can get united and rise up against us. The lesson that we must learn is that only if we stay united can we rise up above ourselves.
So we have to find a way to get back to that unity.
To get back. And as there was a journalist who was killed on the 16th of September as soon as the British captured Delhi, called Maulvi Muhammad Bakar. When the British tried to instigate trouble between the Hindus and Muslims by saying that the Christians and the Muslims are more, more in common, allied, more in common and Sahib-e Kitab hai. He says, hum aur Hindu ahle watan hai. We are people of the same country. So we have to remember that we are Ahle Watan, we live in the same country and we have to live in harmony. That's the only way to progress.
Well, I think that's like the best thing we can take away from this. But thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for calling me.
Oh, of course, thank you. And yeah, so Dastan-e-Ghadar is out in stores and online. It's a gorgeous hardcover. And thank you so much for having us.